So we're joined this morning by Matthew Ellman and Anna Bejshov-Storva, who will be presenting on this topic and sharing their expertise and lots of practical teaching tips. So I'm very much looking forward to that, and I hope you all are too. And before I hand over to them, just a few notes from me. I can see that you're all already using the chat box, and that's wonderful. Please continue to do so throughout the session because Matt and Anya will be asking for your participation. If you have any specific questions about the topic, do use the separate Q&A box. So myself and my colleague Sharon will be answering those questions throughout the webinar. If your question isn't answered, it might be that we're leaving it till the Q&A at the end. And if your question is about a completely different topic, then it might be that we don't have time to get to it. Okay, so sit back and enjoy, take it in, be present. Don't worry about writing notes because you will be sent an email in about a week's time with a recording to the webinar. So you can go back and watch it again and you can share it with your colleagues as well. And we'll also send you links to all of the resources that are mentioned. And of course, you'll have a certificate that you can download. So that's all from me. I'm going to hand over now to Matthew and Anya. Enjoy, and I'll see you at the end for questions.
Thanks so much, Donya. Welcome, everybody. Great, as always, to see so many of you from so many different places around the world. And as Donya mentioned, Anya and I are going to be talking in this session about how to get the most from every moment of learning with primary learners. So when we say getting the most from every moment of learning, what we're talking about is Cambridge's integrated learning and assessment approach. And in this session, Anya and I, although mostly Anya, are going to be talking about how this looks in the classroom. And so there'll be lots of practical techniques that you can take back to your own teaching environment. Before we get started, a little bit about who we are. So I work for Cambridge University Press and Assessment. I'm talking to you from a grey, cold Cambridge today. And I'm a Cambridge teacher trainer and Cambridge author. My book is there on the screen. And joining me is Anya.
Hello. Hi, my name is Anna. I'm originally from Russia, currently working as an EL coordinator for one of the international schools in Thailand. I've been teaching internationally for quite a few years now in different countries, Turkey, Kazakhstan, Malaysia, where I met Matt and Donya, and I'm currently based in Thailand. I'm an examiner, an IELTS examiner. I used to be a Cambridge examiner. I work as a teacher trainer on Delta courses, and I've designed curricula and courses for various schools I worked for in the past. So that's me.
Super, thanks, Anya. So let's start, since we're going to be talking about Anya's teaching context and some of the things that she does to integrate learning and assessment in that context. Let's start with a few details about Anna's context, and then we'll take you through a lesson, or at least the main goal of a lesson that's going to form the backbone of this session. So over to you, Anna.
Thank you. So yes, just a few words about my context, because it will help you to understand all those activities that we are going to show you later on. So as I mentioned previously, I work for an international school in Thailand. It's a British international school, so we use Cambridge International Curriculum for Maths and English, which is combined with IPC, the International Primary Curriculum, to add a bit more of a sort of hands-on experience to our classroom, and we focus a lot on the development of 21st century skills. I'm sure you've heard of that. I'm a coordinator for EAL courses, and in case you don't know what they are, EAL stands for English as an Additional Language, which means we teach English to children who would like to join international schools and to be able to study in English. However, their levels of language proficiency are still not quite there yet for them to be able to access the curriculum, which is delivered in English. And that's what my job is, to make sure that they kind of develop their English and they have enough in English to study comfortably and successfully in English. I mostly work with students who are from years 1, 2, 3, and 4. So they are between 5 and 10 years old. And most of my students are Thai, Chinese, Korean, and a lot of them have mixed backgrounds. Like, for example, a mom can be from China and the dad can be from, I don't know, Canada, let's say. Most of them, when they join our school, they are at an A1 or A2 level on the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, the CEFR scale. And yeah, we need to get them quite a few levels up for them to be able to study in English comfortably, as I mentioned previously. In our lessons, in our courses, EL courses, we focus on general English, of course, on social English, because when they join our school, we need to make sure that they do fit in quite quickly, and then they find, they find the social environment, the new environment that they find themselves in. They find it comfortable to be in. But also, we do focus a lot on academic English. So let's say the language of different subjects that they need to be able to study, again, with the help of English as the medium of instruction. So that's a few words about my context. Yes, and I'd like to begin by asking you to read this text, which is called My Happy Day. This is a text that at some point I asked my students to write as part of the sequence of writing lessons that we had. So can you please read this text? Maybe we'll give you, I don't know, 20, 30 seconds, and then we'll ask you a few questions about this text. All right. So as I mentioned, this is an example of a text that I wanted my students to be able to write, at some point in the sequence of writing lessons that I did with them. And the question that I'm going to ask is this. Have a look. What do you think, looking at this text, what do you think the learning objective for this writing lesson was? Can you please put your ideas in the chat box?
Immediately, lots of people saying past tense or past simple.
Oh my God, the speed of those answers appearing in the chat box. Narratives, yeah, simple past. Recounting, yeah, story writing, yeah, organizing time. Describing a happy day. Thank you so much. Brilliant, thank you. Thank you for all the wonderful ideas. Describing a past experience. Yes. So have a look. This was my learning objective. I thought that by the end of the lesson, students will be better able to describe what they did in the past in writing. And I thought that they will do it by presenting their ideas more coherently using time markers, for example, in the morning, but also more accurately using past verbs, for example, went and washed. And I think when we talk about learning objectives, it is very, very important to keep a few things in mind when identifying and when writing those learning objectives. Number one, we need to make sure that we do focus on outcomes. As you can see here, I used the wording by the end of the lesson. We don't want to just focus on practice. We don't want to spend our time just practicing things without ensuring that our students actually develop their skills or they improve their use of the language. So that's one thing we really need to be careful about. Think in terms of outcomes, think in terms of improvement when formulating your learning objectives. The second thing you need to think about is that if you want your learning objective to be smart, it has to be quite specific. So it's measurable as well. For example, here in this particular example, you can see how we mention specific time markers in the morning and also specific type of grammar that our students that my students were supposed to use, past verbs like went and washed. The more specific your goal is, the easier it will be for you to actually understand whether you have done enough to reach the goal. And I think the third point that we need to keep in mind, which is probably one of the most important ones, when you identify your learning objective, think about the real life application of the skills that you teach your students in your classroom. If we think about it, let's imagine, when was the last time you talked to someone about what you did in the past? I just did it twice today. I met my friends, and the first thing we talked about was, hey, what's up? What have you been up to? And I told them about a wonderful place I visited yesterday. I'm on holiday now, for instance, so I talked to them about my day yesterday. I shared my experience. And it's the same with writing. Yeah, you do talk a lot about the things that you did in the past. For example, you want to catch up with your friend on Facebook or with your friend on Instagram, and that's what you do. Yeah, you open the messenger and you use past simple to talk about past experiences. You communicate your ideas. You talk about it with your friends. So in this particular case, having this learning objective really had this real world application. And by teaching that skill, I knew that I was able to ensure that my students will be able to go outside into the real world and apply the skill. Mm. And then I have another question for you to discuss. What are the learning outcomes do you think I had in mind for this lesson? And when we talk about learning outcomes, maybe think less in terms of the language objectives, in terms of the language focus, and more in terms of other skills that my students could have developed while taking part in this writing lesson. Maybe think about the soft skills or learner training skills. Can you put your ideas in the chat box? Feelings.
Creativity and expression, people are saying.
Imagination, love that. Yeah, creativity, very good. Sequence of events, yeah, for primary children, that's a good one because actually it's not so easy for primary children to understand how to sequence activities yet. Cohesion, excuse me. Oh,
Some
help
people
children
mentioning
get along
punctuation.
better. Diary writing, interesting. Paragraphs, daily routines, nice. So let's look at more learning outcomes that I had in mind. Have a look. So the first one, I wanted my students to be better able to set their own success criteria. By doing this writing lesson, I really wanted to ensure that my students know what is it that they need to do to be able to reach that goal of describing their past experiences in writing. The second learning outcome was this. I wanted my students to be able to monitor their work more purposefully and collect evidence of progress. So I really wanted them to be more present in the moment of writing. I wanted them to understand how well they were doing while they were completing the task. And the the last one, excuse me, I wanted them to become better at assessing their own work and identifying ways to improve it. Because we all want our students, again, to be more present, to be more knowledgeable about their progress, and to set goals for the future. And these are quite significant aims, quite significant learning outcomes. And you know how I was able to achieve all of this? With the help of integrated learning and assessment system, the ILA. And we're going to talk about it in more detail today, so you can understand how can you achieve all of this by applying the ILA approach. Let's look at our aims for today, the aims of this session for today. So we would like you to know, after this session, we would like you to find out more and to know more about the key elements and principles of ILA. And also we want you to find out more about the techniques for implementing ILA with primary learners in particular. And what we want you to do after this session is to actually go and try out some of the techniques from this session in your classroom. And also we hope that you will start seeing better connections, clearer connections between teaching, learning, and assessment in your classroom.
Super, thanks, Anna. So, with all of that in mind, let's just do a quick recap of what integrated learning and assessment is all about before we go and see how Anna implemented it in her classroom with that lesson about the happy day. So this is what we talked about in the first webinar that Donya mentioned. There was a link shared in the chat, but if you didn't see it, don't worry. There'll be another link shared in your follow-up email. But one of the things that we talked about in that session was the different ways that we can look at teaching and describe teaching. And we looked at the example of teaching versus coaching. What does it mean to you if you think of your work as coaching instead of teaching? Some of the things that came up in that session were the idea of performance, that teachers teach knowledge, but coaches develop performance. And as language teachers, really performance is what we want to aim for, right? So as Anya mentioned, she's in her lesson, she's teaching her learners how to perform in terms of describing what they've been doing. And that's something that we do all the time, every day in speech and in writing. So it's not just about knowing things. You can't tell someone what you did by just giving them a list of past tense verbs. It's about performing and being able to create a text in a relevant context. The other difference or thing to pick up on between teaching and coaching is who does the work. And often in the classroom, we have this idea that the teacher is the one doing the work, standing at the front of the room, kind of imparting knowledge, and the learners have to kind of be passive and take it on board. Of course, in the language classroom, that's not what happens at all. And it's much more like a coaching situation where the coach is helping the team members or coachees, whatever you want to call them, to perform better. But they have to do the work. So if you think of a famous coach like Pep Guardiola in football, he can't go and score the goals for his team. The players have to do that. What he can do and what he does do is develop them so that they're able to perform better. And the third and final thing to pick up on is the way that performance is used as the basis for feedback and improvement. So in a coaching situation, in a sports situation, every game you play is an opportunity to see what you do well and to see where you can improve. And we can use that and deliver feedback on that to get better. So in the same way, every lesson and many of the activities that you do in your own language classroom can be used to see where the learners are doing well and where they can do better. And from there, we're constantly using the classroom as a place for development. So integrated learning and assessment is about combining teaching, learning, and assessment methods. But really, there are kind of three core elements to this. The first element is a change in the mindset. So it's partly thinking of yourself perhaps as a coach more than as a teacher, but it's also putting learning at the top of everything that you do. So this is true for teachers, but it's also true for learners, for school leaders, and for parents as well. And it's easy for learning to kind of slip down the list for all of those groups, right? Sometimes as a teacher, you just want to get through the lesson. You think to yourself, look, I've got this huge book to cover, this enormous curriculum to get through. We just need to cover the material. Sometimes you're focused on trying to make your lessons engaging and enjoyable, which is really important, but learning has to be at the top. And it's the same for your students as well. Often, perhaps most of the time, students are not coming into the classroom with learning at the top of their priorities. They're, thinking about their friendship groups, other things going on in their lives, exams, maybe they just want to pass their exams. So this is a bit of a shift, I think, for most people that are engaged in the learning process, putting learning at the top all the time. The second element is aligning things in the school, in the institution. So aligning the curriculum, assessment, teacher CPD, and so on, so that everything pulls in the same direction towards learning. And again, for various reasons, this doesn't always happen. And perhaps it's not necessarily something that you feel you can control if you're a teacher rather than a school manager or coordinator. Maybe you don't feel you can control this. But what you can do is control what happens in your classroom. And that's the third element, the 4 pillars of classroom practice. That's where they come in. So these 4 pillars are learning objectives, evidence of progress, actionable feedback, and tailored follow-up. And I'll just give you a moment to read the brief description of each one of those things. All of these things need to be in place in your classroom in order to get the most from every moment of learning. And you might be looking at this list and thinking, well, I do all of these things already. And in many ways, you probably do some of them already. What we're trying to do is to do each one in more depth, more consistently, and in a more joined up way. So we're connecting all of them. And you'll see through what Anya describes how that works now, in fact. So I'm going to hand back to Anya, and we can see how ILA, and in particular, these 4 pillars work in practice.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. We can go to the next slide. Yes, so yes, let's look at how it all works together. And that's exactly the subtitle or the title you can see on this slide, bringing it all together. I think it's very, very important to keep in mind that this is a system. And by definition, a system is a group of parts all working together in which each element contributes to the success of this system. So I'm pretty sure that all of us do bits and pieces of ILA, like maybe we set learning objectives from time to time, and sometimes we collect evidence, sometimes we give feedback to our students, and sometimes we follow up. But the success of this system lies in making sure it all happens, as Matt said, very consistently, and it works as a system altogether. So I'm going to describe a writing lesson that I did with my year 3 students. And can you please listen and try to think of the principles of ILA that I'm trying to demonstrate to you by showing the activities that I had done with my students. You don't have to type in the chat box straight away. We would rather you sort of thought about it, and then when we asked you to write things in the chat box, that's when you can do it, just to make sure we can see all the best comments all together. So let's begin. Sorry, Matt. Yeah, so we're going to talk about setting learning objectives first. So have a look. As we remember, my learning objective was, by the end of the lesson, students will be better able to describe what they did in the past in writing. And we are going to start at a point when my students saw this text on the board. Just to make sure, just to clarify, just to make sure we're on the same page here, this wasn't the first lesson in the sequence of kind of lessons that I did developing my students' writing skills. In our previous lesson, before we even got to this point, first of all, we talked about what makes us happy, because we were actually learning a unit on feelings. I think somebody mentioned feelings previously in the chat box. That was the overall unit of work that we did. So by the time we got to this point, we had already read this text, and we had done a few comprehension tasks to ensure that there was understanding of this text. We had reviewed past verbs, regular and irregular. And we talked about how we use those time markers or time words to make sure that it's easier for readers to follow our writing. And we also started brainstorming ideas for our own writing, to see what my students would like to write about when describing their happy days. So you see, a lot of work had been done even before we got to the point of writing, of actual writing.
I think it's interesting here, Anya, to note, I suppose, that your learning objective describes your objective for that lesson. But in your mind as a teacher, that objective, as you've mentioned, links to everything that you've done. So all of your objectives kind of build up to something broader.
And this is what happened next. I showed them this thing on the board, the so-called get ready, do, done framework. Can you please look at this activity, at this screenshot, and can you type in the chat box how you think I use this activity to help my students become better writers? Can you guess? Frame the ideas. There's an example presented there. There's a planning stage, well done. Yeah, there's brainstorming involved. Scaffolding. Reverse engineering, love that term. Sounds very, very fancy.
Hatice says, is it something like KWL? And
Yeah. Note taking, first draft, give examples, kind of KWL, yes. Providing input as well.
Yeah, ask them to work backwards.
Work backwards. Excellent ideas. Thank you so much. Okay. Yeah, I think we can move to the next slide and I'll show how it actually worked. Yes, you were absolutely right. Have a look, guys. So I showed them the final outcome in the green column. Yeah, that was what I wanted my students to be able to produce by the end of the lesson. And then we started looking at the first red column, the get ready column. And I listed the following from my students. I asked them, what do you think they need to have ready? What do you think they needed to have at hand even before they started writing? And together we talked about it and we realized that we need these three things. First of all, we needed the ideas. I don't know if you remember, but I mentioned previously that we had already started brainstorming ideas by drawing pictures, describing, outlining kind of our happy days. So the first thing that I wanted all of my students to have was to have that handout with their ideas, with the pictures in front of them. The second thing we all agreed was important for us to have before we even start writing was having the list of past verbs, irregular past verbs. I usually have this list on the wall in my classroom, and also my learners have it at the back of their notebooks so they can refer to this list as they write and check their writing to make sure that they actually use past verbs correctly. And the third thing we agreed on was those time markers, like when I woke up in the morning, etc. My students said that they wanted to have them somewhere out there ready for them to use to improve their writing, to structure their writing. So that was the get ready column done. And then we went to the next column, the do column. The do column, as many of you guessed, was the actual sequence of steps that we felt we needed to go through while completing the writing task. So again, I listed all of it from students. It wasn't just my ideas, given to them. We actually talked about it with my students, and they said that the first thing they need to do is to look again at the pictures, just to make sure that they were happy with the ideas that they had brainstormed. Then the second step was actually to start writing, followed up by the step of checking while they were writing whether they were using those past verbs correctly, whether they were using the time markers correctly. And also I added a point of my own. I also asked them to check whether they were writing in paragraphs, because this is something that we had worked on in our previous writing. And I wanted to make sure that actually, they remember that and they can, replicate the skill that we had talked about previously in this particular writing. Some of my students also said that while they were writing, they need to pay attention to spelling, because this is still a bit of an difficult area for most of them. And finally, we agreed that step number 4 is going to be them reading the whole text just to make sure that it definitely makes sense. So those were the things.
So just remind us, Anya, how old are your learners?
My learners, so year 3, so that's 7 and 8 years old.
So 7 and 8 years old, but you have elicited this column, and this is the whole kind of lesson sequence.
But to be fair, like
Yeah,
because they do understand. I think obviously it's not the first time that I'm eliciting things from them. Like, as I mentioned previously, in our school, we do value learner autonomy, and we do value learner thinking a lot. So a lot of those students have been through our kind of school education for at least half a year. So within that half a year, we had been able to sort of train them to think about the learning process in this way. I think this was the third major writing that we did together. And you can see that they're already sort of familiar with the process and familiar with the thinking that I was expecting from them.
Yeah, that's great and so important in helping them feel a sense of ownership and sense of agency in their learning.
So now imagine that you're my students and this is what you have in front of you. And my next question as a teacher is, what do you think the success criteria will be for this particular writing? Can you please put your ideas in the chat box?
So people saying using past simple or using the correct grammar, using a certain number of words.
Yeah, that's a good one. Having a coherent text, that's a good one. Oh, I can see someone started formulating success criteria in a learner-friendly language, like I can use. That's very good. Yeah, good. Good ideas, guys. Good ideas. Well done. Yeah. So basically, at that point, I introduced my students. Well, again, it wasn't the first time that they saw this type of handout. We usually ask our students to identify and set success criteria for themselves. So you can see here a screenshot of that particular handout, my success criteria at the bottom. And the first two, I try to elicit from students. So I asked them, like looking back at what we had just talked about, what do you think the success criteria will be? And just like you said, that it's something about making the text coherent and using the past tense. That's what they said as well. They said that they needed to use past verbs correctly, and they said that they needed to use time words correctly. So that's what we put there, and it was formulated in a learner-friendly way. For example, I used past verbs and I used time words, and then I asked my students to copy those success criteria onto the handouts that they had in front of them. But can you guess what the star success criterion was? What do you think? Yeah, it acts as a checklist for students. Well done. Yeah. What do you think the star success criterion was? My story makes sense. I use spelling. Yeah. So basically, the star one was the one that I wanted my students to identify themselves. The first two success criteria, they were sort of my agenda, let's be honest about it. That's the teacher agenda. But we do want our students to have their own agenda as well. We do want to have that kind of engagement with the task. Because as you know, if you set your own goals, you're much more likely to work towards them. So what I asked them to do at that point is to look back at previous writings that we had done together. And I asked them to look at the similar success criteria handouts that we had completed previously. And from that, I elicited from them the areas that they thought we could be working on. So the first thing that they told me was, my story makes sense. That was the first idea which came from my students, because in the writings that we had done previously, it was still a little bit of a challenge for us. Some students said that they really wanted to work on neat handwriting, because some of them are still actually quite new to writing in Latin script. So that's an area that they felt was important for them. Some students said that they wanted to continue to work on improving their spelling. And some students, especially Thai students, said that they wanted to work on full stops and capital letters. Because I don't know if you know that, but in Thai script, they don't really use punctuation that much. So for Thai students in particular, because of the impact of their primary language, they need to pay much more attention to kind of signposting ideas in their text with the help of punctuation. So basically, the STAR criterion was the one that students were able to choose themselves. I did not limit them in any way. I just told them to write what they wanted to write based on the writings that they had done previously. So now let's think about it. So I have shown you a sequence of activities that I had done in my writing lesson by that point. Can you think and put your ideas in the chat box? What principles of ILA or what principles of good teaching can you spot here in these activities? How was I trying to do to ensure that my students, first of all, complete the task, but also become better learners? What do you think? Excellent. Scaffolding, eliciting answers, motivation. organizing. Yeah, learners are the owners. Yeah, the owners of learning, learner agency. Setting goals, clear objectives.
So these principles are the ones that we're thinking about are just in relation to learning objectives.
Just in relation to learning objectives, yeah. So let's have a look at those principles. All of these come from the ILA approach. I think the first one, plan your lesson backwards. I can see quite a few of them put that idea there about reverse engineering. It is very, very important to ensure that you plan your lessons backwards. So you look at the final outcome. You look at you consider what you want your students to be better able to do by the end of the lesson or a sequence of lessons, and you think of the steps that you need to take in order to get there to that goal. And then you plan your lessons accordingly. You think of the activities that can help you reach, kind of achieve every single step on the way.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that sometimes gets missed is that the final step or near the end of the lesson is the learners proving that they can do what you want them to do. And then it's kind of building up to that proof. So in Anya's lesson, the learners proving that they could do it is, of course, them writing the text.
Derive learning objectives from your course materials. I think for me personally, it's all about making those learning objectives accessible to your students. I think we talked about this teacher agenda previously. Yeah, we don't want that to be just our agenda. We want that to be our student agenda as well. And it's much easier. You know, one thing I'm not particularly a big fan of is standing in front of my classroom, even before I start teaching, and saying things like, today in this lesson, we are going to learn about how to use past simple to improve our writing, because this is not how you engage your learners, especially your primary learners, with your learning objectives. You go through the activities with them and you show them the need to improve. You show them the value of the activities that you do. And from that, you elicit those learning objectives. If you remember in the slides, you know, kind of that I've shown you, we went through those for a lot of activities together with them, even before we got to the point of writing. So when I asked them what exactly we're going to work on in our writing, it was very, very easy for them to understand and to tell me what it was, because they had done those activities, like preparatory activities, prior to writing. We need to clarify success criteria and make them accessible to learners. Again, linking back to what I've just said, if you write your if you list success criteria, make sure that you, for example, word them in a learner-friendly language. Get them to tell you what they will be working on. For example, with my years 1 and 2, when my students are just between 5 and 7 years old, their success criteria are very often just 1 or 2 words. For example, success criteria 1, I don't know, what can we think of? I don't know, action words, or I don't know, adjectives, descriptive adjectives, things which are kind of, they know because they would have known at that point because they would have done some practice prior to that. Share learning objectives and success criteria with learners. If you have a chance, create some sort of handout which they can complete so they can, actually have something tangible, like physical, in front of them as a reference point for the time when they start working on those activities. And encourage your learners to write their own learning objectives. Yes, it's very, very important. It's not just about us, it is about them. Very often you would be surprised how much they can actually tell you about what they want to improve, which is in their learning, in their language use. We just really need to start asking them about it. Okay, so let's look at the next part, the next stage of the ILA system, and that's collecting evidence of progress. So have a look here. So now we have everything here on the board, right? And this is the kind of the thing that I asked my students to do. I asked them to come to the board. They started working on their writing, and I asked them to actually come to the board and write their names each time they had completed a step in that process of writing. So I gave you an example here of kind of with David and Olive. For example, Olive had finished, checking that she had brainstormed all the ideas. She came to the board, she wrote her name there, and then David did the same, etc., etc., etc. And I really like using this approach, like asking my students to come to the board and write their names there, for several reasons. For me, the first reason is promoting this self-monitoring. I really want my students to actually monitor their work themselves, and kind of so that they are more engaged in the learning process. The second positive thing about using this activity, asking students to write their names on the board, is that it gives me a chance to actually monitor with much more purpose, because I know at what stage each child is in their writing, so I can just walk around and check whether they're actually achieving what they think they are achieving. So for instance, if Olive said, I have already checked my irregular past verbs, I can approach her quietly, discreetly, and double check whether she had actually done it and give her advice if she needs a little bit more help. It's also about accountability. I want my students to make sure that if they put their name there, they can actually, show me that they had done it. And the last thing is about creating sort of a healthy dose of competition even. I don't know about you guys, but in my class, I have a few, obviously, students who are quite fast at doing things in class. And then there are a few kids who just, take their time and work quite slowly. And somehow, when those names are out there, those students are motivated to work just a little bit faster to catch up with their peers. That's why I like, putting names out there as well. So let's think about this. What do you think? Now, from the point of view of collecting evidence, what principles of ILA can you spot here?
I'm going to show one just to give everyone a helping hand.
Thank you. Yeah, the first one is there for you. Have a look. It's a good idea to use classroom activities for collecting evidence. I think sometimes we shy away from collecting evidence simply because we think that there is just that we need to create an additional activity to do that, but we actually don't. We can just use what we are doing in class to monitor with more purpose and to collect that evidence. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can just use what we have.
Yeah, Ricardo says informal assessment.
Yeah. Or getting instant feedback, I like that. That's very good. Creating checklists. Oh, that's a very good question about teaching diverse class levels.
Yeah, maybe we can come back to that at the end.
Yeah.
Question of large classes.
Let's have a look at the next principle there, Matt. Monitor with purpose. Make sure you don't just sit down. When your students are trained to do things well, there's always this feeling that you can just sit down and relax and monitor their work from a side. But no, we do need to walk around and check what our students are doing, and we need to help them while doing that. Please make the most of your in-class questions. Asking the right question at the right time is one of the best things you can do, I think, in class as a teacher. Sometimes, when I walk around, I see that my students, for example, one of the reasons for that is that because it can prompt more learner reflection. Sometimes when I walk around, for instance, and I can see that most of my students, for instance, are making mistakes in the same area, I would even do a clapping thing, and I would stop the whole activity and I would re-clarify a point for everyone at that point so that they can continue working and not making that mistake anymore. Yeah, we need to make sure that we promote learner reflection. And of course, we need to involve students in gathering evidence about their learning, because they need to be involved in this process as much as we are involved in this process, so they can do self and peer assessment later on.
We had lots of mentions of feedback in the chat there, so moving on nicely to actionable feedback.
So then this was the next part of the lesson. I don't know if you remember, but I showed you part of this success criteria kind of assessment handout. And it actually consisted of 3 parts. The first one was the kind of success criteria identified by me and by my students. And then the next part was my goal, the goal set by the students and my teacher's goal, the goal set by me as a teacher. So let's look at the first, at the success criteria first. What do you think those boxes on the side indicate? Why are there green boxes, yellow boxes? Can you put your ideas in the chat box? Traffic light. Yeah, grades. How well they have completed. Brilliant. Yes, Matt, I think we can continue. I think this is clear to our audience. Yes. Yeah, we also use this. Yeah, traffic lights. We also use traffic lights in our school. So students use the kind of these colors for self-assessment. If it's green, it means that they can do it and they didn't need a lot of help. Yellow means they can do it with some help, and it was maybe they needed a bit more clarification. And red means that they're still learning to do it and they need kind of a lot of help with that. One more question that I have for you here is this. Can you please check the colors on the left side, like next to the numbers for each success criteria? Why do you think I use color coding? Why do you think I have, some numbers highlighted in orange, some in blue, some in purple? Learning checkpoints to sort the different grammar for evidence. Okay. To make it easier for students to understand. Priorities, I like that one. That's a good one. To assess their writing. Exactly, guys. So obviously it's very difficult to teach primary students to do self and peer assessment. And one thing I think which is key in doing that is showing them how to look for evidence in their speaking and their writing so they can actually do the self-assessment. So here you can see an example. The first success criteria was highlighted in purple and the student underlined. I wanted to show an example how a student would have underlined those past verbs to show me the evidence of them highlighting the box in green. So they showed me evidence that they knew how to use past verbs in their writing. So after that, I asked them, after they have done the assessment, I asked them to identify goals. Oh, sorry, Matthew, can we just go back for just a second? Just 1 second, yeah? So I asked them to identify their goals. And you can see here that most students, they usually just write things like past verbs or spelling. But of course, this is a very kind of broad goal and it can't really be worked on. So this is where you step in as a teacher. And for example, if a student just wrote spelling, then you give them a concrete, tangible advice about how to how to improve their spelling. For example, for this particular student, I said, choose 5 words from your story and spell them, write them down 3 times and use them in sentences and writing. And after that, you also, because you would have also read their writing at that point, after that, you can also set your own goal for them. For example, for this student in particular, I told them that, yes, I agreed that their story didn't always make sense. So I told them that they need to stop after 10 minutes of writing, reread what they had written previously, and then continue to make sure that it all makes sense.
So this is all about making it actionable, right, Anna?
Actionable, yeah.
Something that I can actually do.
Matthew, maybe we can go straight to the principles after this.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, there are a few principles of ILA that you can spot in this. First of all, definitely plan time for feedback. I think feedback is one of the most important parts of the learning process. And you really I'd much rather spend a little bit more time on feedback and teach my students all the valuable skills of learner reflection than maybe perhaps do another lesson on present simple. Because I think if you teach them those transferable skills, 21st century skills, they will last for much longer and they will be very, very useful. You need to definitely link your feedback to learning objectives and success criteria. Like in any typical writing, you would be able to, for example, find a lot of mistakes, let's put it this way, but it doesn't mean you're going to comment on all of them. Just stick to what you have taught your students and stick to your success criteria and learning objectives. Make sure to include feedback on both positive elements as well as ways to improve writing. And of course, check that your students have understood your feedback and they know what to do next. Yeah, especially with primary students. If you have the time to actually have 1, 2 a 1 or 2 minute chat with them after you've given them written feedback. It's very, very important. And promote self and peer assessment. Yeah, it's the same idea again and again. We are there to coach them to be successful language learners, even outside, when they kind of go outside of our classroom, because we won't be always kind of there to help them. So they need to continue to work on their language themselves.
Fantastic. Okay, and finally, the last pillar of ILA, tailored follow-up.
Mm-hmm. So have a look. This is an actual example of what one of my students wrote. Can you please look at it and think, what kind of tailored follow-up activities would you plan to help this student consolidate their learning and move forward? What do you think? You can put your ideas in the chat box. Try to make sure that your kind of those follow-up activities are quite specific. Yeah, what areas do you think the student needs to work on? Paragraphs, sentence formation, reported
Repeat the
speech.
task, someone says.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And for example, if you say punctuation, what kind of activity do you think you can follow up with?
We have to make it actionable. What
Yeah,
will
to
we...
make it, yeah, we need to make it actionable. We need to make sure that they can actually do that. Mm-hmm. Quizzes, okay. Peer chat, mm-hmm. Okay. So with this student in particular, I felt that first of all, this was a girl, that she could have written so much more in those paragraphs. So she started well, but then she sort of ran out of ideas. So one follow-up activity that I had in mind, for this particular learner was, and actually for many of my learners in that particular writing lesson, because I thought the volume of writing was a bit of an issue. So we actually talked about our happy days orally, and I encouraged them to ask questions to each other. And then I asked them to go ahead and add at least 1 or 2 sentences to each paragraph that they had written previously. And also for this student in particular, I don't know if you've spotted it here, but she had a bit of a problem with regular past verbs. She kept squeezing in those ed endings there, following my advice. Yeah, Matthew is showing it to you there. So I wrote a list of, I don't know, 10 kind of verbs for her underneath the writing. And she then added IED endings and ED endings to practice making those regular steps. Yeah, a word bank can be given. Mm-hmm. Oh, good, good. I can see some very, very good practical activities to follow up. Well done. Okay.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
So all
Do
of
we
this
have a little
work
bit of...
involves lots of data collection, doesn't it, Anya?
Yeah, yeah. And for us, it's very important to keep record of what we want to achieve in our classroom. So from the teacher's point of view, I can tell you how we do it in our school, how we keep record of what we have achieved and what we need to work on. As we are a Cambridge school, we have a list of Cambridge objectives. And after we feel we have reached them, in our curriculum documents, we highlight them in green, yellow, red, depending on how well we think we have achieved them. And also our lesson plans, they have like a box at the bottom with suggestions for improvement for next year, where we can take notes after individual lessons to make sure that when we teach this lesson next year, we follow up and change a few
So just to
things in
be
our lesson. Mm-hmm.
so to be clear, Anya, these points 1, 2, 3, these are points that you added from your lesson, your reflection after the lesson.
Yes, after I have taught the lesson, kind of I added these points. For example, next year when I teach this lesson, I really need to make sure that I introduce more spelling, kind of more work on spelling of regular past verbs, because this was sort of a bit of an issue for all of my students. And I thought that I needed to do more oral work before writing to prepare them better for writing, to make their writing more extensive. Yeah. And from the student's point of view, we just need to make sure that all those, for example, self-assessment and peer assessment handouts, that they are all there, they're all completed, and they're all attached to the activities that we are doing in class and added to their workbooks. And ultimately, their workbooks or notebooks, they become our students' portfolio of work to track their progress. And also we use them to elicit from students the goals that they want to set for the future. So when we talk about tailored follow-up activities, there are a few principles we need to keep in mind as well. We need to reflect on your impact after each lesson, as we've shown you previously, by taking notes after each lesson. We need to try to collate evidence of learning, as in the example that I've shown you with student notebooks becoming their portfolio of work. You need to try to return to challenging topics if you have the time. If you think that something needs more work, you need to actually do something about it and reteach perhaps some topics to your students. Yeah, some activities can be rerun or repeated with a different level of challenge, for example, or a different level of scaffolding. You review and recycle difficult topics, within different contexts so they can be memorized better. And of course, you respond to your learner preferences, their reflections and engagement. If your learners identify an area they need to work on or an area they have succeeded in, then it's important to respond to that and acknowledge that and work on those things and celebrate those things as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Anya. And I think, as you mentioned before, some of these things we'll be doing already, but it's all about making this a system and joining it all up. I'm just going to talk very quickly about how we do some of this in Cambridge learning materials and exams. So on your screen here is an example from a Cambridge course called Power Up for primary learners. And this is the start of a unit in the book, all about breakfast. And in Power Up, we have what we call missions. So the mission for this unit, for the whole series of lessons, is to become a restaurant owner. So you can see that the mission has been broken down into 4 stages. So the first part is create a restaurant, then talk about restaurants with a partner, then create a menu, and then write a review about the restaurant. So what is happening here is that we have a series of learning outcomes which are communicative and phrased in terms that the learners can understand. So learners of this age and of this language level can understand. But of course, all of this doesn't mean that they're not learning grammar or vocabulary. All of that is built into these different parts of the mission as well. But by having a mission for the whole unit and then breaking it down, we create that sense of coherence. We start to build that system that Anya spoke about. So this page is from a little bit further on in the same unit, and you can see the mission at the end of the page. And with that idea of planning backwards, this mission, create a restaurant, or submission, part of the mission, this is our proof of this part of the unit. So this is where learners can prove that they can do what we want them to do. And if I zoom in for you, you can see at the bottom corner of the page there, really small, we've got defining relative clauses. That's our grammar for this page. But we don't need to talk too much to the learners about defining relative clauses, how to structure the syntax of all of this. We make it very accessible. We provide examples, and then we ask the learners to notice patterns. And that's the best way of doing this with children, rather than going into meta language in a lot of detail. But it's there at the bottom of the page just to highlight that the grammar is being studied. But as I say, it's about noticing patterns. We've got a text here. Learners pick out the patterns from the text, and then when they create their restaurant, they will use that structure when they talk about their restaurant. So for the learners there, all they're doing is talking about a restaurant, creating a restaurant. But really, we've got that hidden agenda that Anya mentioned of kind of working in some language practice at the same time. In Cambridge assessments as well, we see some of these principles coming through too. So in your classroom, if you're using a Cambridge book, Cambridge can't be there to give feedback to the learners. That is that's your job. That's the teacher's role. And that's where you can shine and be, really bring value to the whole process. But where Cambridge do listen to your learners is when they take a Cambridge exam. And following that process, we will give feedback to the learners. So this example is what you see on the left is a certificate, and on the right is a statement of results from the Cambridge English Qualifications Digital for Young Learners. So you see that they don't get a grade because that's a form of feedback that doesn't really tell them anything about how to move forward. They get shield badges, and then the statement of results tells them their strengths, what they need to work on, and how they can improve, what they can actually do. So we focus on making that feedback actionable. If you'd like to learn more about Cambridge English Qualifications Digital for Young Learners, do a quick scan of the code on your screen, or you can wait for your follow-up email and we'll share all the information there. But this is a new test for young learners, and it's designed with young learners in mind, so it kind of feels like an adventure rather than an exam. The important thing here, I think, is that Cambridge is supporting you to implement those 4 pillars: the learning objectives, evidence of progress, actionable feedback, and tailored follow-up. And the best way for that to happen is to have that alignment between your learning materials and your assessment, and then for you to kind of join into that process and kind of make it real in the classroom. So it's a partnership really between Cambridge and the teacher. We're coming to the end, so let's just talk briefly about your next steps. Anna, over to you.
We have a little bit of time. So of course, obviously, it's very important for you to actually try some of the activities that you have seen today, if you can. We understand that all contexts are different, and there were quite a few questions there about how you would use these activities in, for example, in a bigger classroom or a classroom of younger students. These are all very, very important and valid questions. We're sorry we didn't have a lot of time to talk about this, but this is what we want you to do right now. Can you please, think of 1 or 2 activities that you can really bring back to your classroom? Think about how you could modify it to match your context, and actually go ahead and do it. Yeah, no excuses. Just go ahead and try to do it.
And I think bear in mind that these techniques are techniques for your whole career. You can be, it may not work the first time, but this is something to slowly build up, adding these principles one by one. And to help you do that, we've got a couple of support options for you. So if you go to cambridge.org/ILA, the first thing you can download is our research paper, The Power of Integrating Learning and Assessment. And this kind of gives you the whole theoretical background about how to integrate learning and assessment. If you don't have time to read the whole research paper, there is a 2-page version. Everyone has time to read 2 pages. So you can download that 2-page version instead if you want to. And to learn more about the principles that Anya's been sharing in today's webinar, we also have our guide for teachers. This is free to download, again, from cambridge.org/ILA. And this is going to help you build these techniques into your teaching repertoire so that you can integrate learning and assessment for the rest of your teaching career. And if you're interested, there is a new book, because we were talking about learning outcomes, lesson design, backwards design, all of these kinds of principles. If you'd like to learn more, there is a new book by Scott Thornbury, which came out last month, 66 Essentials of Lesson Design. You can find out more about that at cambridge.org/CHLT. But for now, thank you very, very much to Anya for that session. And I will pass back to Donia.
Thank you, both of you. That was so jam-packed. I'm just going to read one comment from the chat box that I just saw. This comment was in capital letters, and they said, "That was the most useful webinar I've ever attended." So that is high praise. Unfortunately, we have run over time, so we don't really have time to ask questions. But thank you, Anya. I saw that you were answering lots at the end. And yeah, thank you. So I think actually we did answer most of them, and you were both doing very well at answering as you went along. So I'm just going to take this opportunity to thank you all for your active participation. Thank you so much, Matt and Anya. You know, it's so insightful. So often we get lots of ideas, but to actually see examples of your classroom and actually what you wrote on the board and what your learners have done, it just makes it so much more meaningful to see it in practice. So thank you for sharing that. It looks like a lovely school. I think I would have loved to be in your class as a child, Anya.
And you know, I saw a lot of comments there asking, you know, how we were able to achieve, you know, this kind of learner training. And my answer to that is that if all teachers get together, because that's our goal as teachers, our school wants our learners to be very good learners, because we understand that whatever they lack in English, they can compensate by learner training. So all of our teachers work towards the same goal of helping our students become very autonomous, successful learners. And if we all work together, we can achieve that.
Wonderful. I think we might need to have a future webinar just on that, because as soon as you showed that slide about learner autonomy and eliciting and the rules, the chat box went crazy. Wow, how do you do this? How can we do this with such learners? How long does it take? So I think that might be one for the future, Anya. And for those of you that also teach secondary learners and adults, we're going to have a webinar on the same topic, applying the principles of ILA 4